Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Speak and Feel English, the podcast where conversations are not just about learning English, but about truly feeling every word you speak and understanding life through meaningful discussions. I'm Mia.
And I'm Ethan. Today's topic is something deeply personal yet universally relatable. Life is short. Don't waste it. It sounds simple, almost like something we've all heard 1,000 times, but the real question is, do we actually live like we believe it?
That's a powerful question, Ethan, because most people intellectually understand that life is limited, yet emotionally they behave as if they have endless time. They delay happiness, postpone dreams, and keep waiting for the perfect moment, which often never arrives.
Exactly, and I think one of the biggest reasons behind this is comfort. People get comfortable in routines, even if those routines don't fulfill them. They wake up, go through the same motions, and tell themselves they'll change things someday, but someday quietly turns into years.
And what's even more concerning is how subtly time passes. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't warn you. One day you're planning your future, and suddenly you realize that a significant portion of your life has already gone by without you truly experiencing it.
That realization can be quite unsettling. I remember a moment when I paused and asked myself, am I actually living or am I just existing? Because there's a difference. Existing is about survival, but living is about intention, growth, and meaningful experiences.
That distinction is crucial. Living requires awareness. It requires you to be present and conscious about how you spend your time, your energy, and even your thoughts. Because wasting life isn't always about doing nothing. It's often about doing things that don't truly matter to you.
That's such an important point. Many people are busy all the time, yet they still feel empty. That's because being busy doesn't necessarily mean being productive or fulfilled. You can fill your schedule and still feel like you're wasting your life.
Yes, and I think a big part of that comes from not knowing what truly matters to you. When you don't have clarity about your values or your purpose, it becomes easy to follow what everyone else is doing instead of creating your own path.
And when you follow someone else's path, you often end up feeling disconnected from your own life. It might look successful from the outside, but internally, it feels incomplete.
So maybe the first step to not wasting life is awareness, pausing and asking yourself honest questions. What do I really want? What makes me feel alive? What am I doing just because it's expected of me?
And those questions require courage because the answers might push you out of your comfort zone. They might force you to make changes that feel uncomfortable at first, but necessary in the long run.
Absolutely. Growth is rarely comfortable, but staying stuck is far more painful over time. When you ignore your inner voice for too long, it eventually turns into regret.
And regret is one of the heaviest emotions a person can carry. It's not just about what you did wrong, it's often about what you didn't do at all. The chances you didn't take, the words you didn't say, the life you didn't fully live.
That's why this topic matters so much. Life being short isn't meant to scare you, it's meant to wake you up. It's a reminder that your time is valuable, and how you choose to spend it defines the quality of your life.
I think one of the biggest traps people fall into is this constant reliance on the idea of later. It sounds harmless at first, almost responsible even, but in reality, it becomes a silent excuse that delays action indefinitely. People often say, I'll start working on my dreams later, or I'll enjoy life once everything is settled, without realizing that life is never truly settled.
That's absolutely true, Ethan. And what makes this mindset so dangerous is how normal it feels. Society almost encourages this pattern. We are taught to delay gratification, to sacrifice the present for the future, and while that can be useful in moderation, it often turns into a habit of postponing everything that brings real joy and meaning.
Exactly. And the irony is that the future people are waiting for is never guaranteed. We assume that we'll have more time, more energy, and better circumstances later, but life doesn't always follow that script. Unexpected changes happen, priorities shift, and sometimes opportunities disappear before we even realize their value.
And I think another layer to this is the illusion of control. When people say later, it gives them a sense of comfort, as if they're in charge of when things will happen. But in reality, time is one of the few things we don't control. We can plan, we can prepare, but we cannot pause or extend time according to our convenience.
That's such an important realization because once you truly understand that time is limited and unpredictable, your perspective starts to change. You begin to see the present moment as something valuable rather than something to rush through.
Yes, and valuing the present doesn't mean ignoring the future. It means creating a balance where you work toward your goals without sacrificing your current happiness entirely. Because if you keep postponing joy, you might reach your goals but still feel empty inside.
I've seen that happen to so many people. They spend years chasing success, telling themselves they'll be happy once they achieve a certain milestone, but when they finally get there, they realize they've missed out on so many meaningful experiences along the way.
That's the cost of constantly living in later. You trade present moments for a future that may not even fulfill you the way you expect. And the sad part is, those moments don't come back. Time moves forward whether you fully experience it or not.
So the question becomes, why do people keep doing this? Why do we keep delaying things that matter to us?
I think fear plays a huge role here. Fear of failure is one of the biggest reasons people delay action. Starting something new means risking mistakes, and many people would rather stay in their comfort zone than face the possibility of failure.
That makes sense, and I'd add fear of judgment to that list as well. People often worry about what others will think if they try something and don't succeed. That fear can be paralyzing, and it keeps them stuck in the planning phase instead of taking action.
Absolutely. And there's also fear of change itself. Even if someone is unhappy with their current situation, it's familiar, and familiarity feels safe. Change, on the other hand, introduces uncertainty, and not everyone is ready to embrace that.
But the truth is, avoiding change doesn't protect you. It just keeps you stagnant. Growth only happens when you step outside of what's comfortable, even if it feels difficult at first.
Yes, and another important point is that people often underestimate how quickly time passes. Days feel long, but years feel short. When you keep saying, "I'll do it tomorrow," those tomorrows accumulate, and before you know it, a significant amount of time has gone by.
That perspective really puts things into context. It reminds you that small delays can turn into long-term regrets if you're not careful.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to shift your mindset from later to now, not in a reckless way, but in a conscious and intentional way. You don't have to do everything at once, but you can take small steps today instead of waiting indefinitely.
I like that idea, taking small steps. It makes things feel more manageable. Sometimes people delay action because they feel overwhelmed by how big their goals are, but breaking things down into smaller actions can make it easier to start.
Yes, because starting is often the hardest part. Once you take that first step, you build momentum, and momentum creates confidence. The more you act, the less intimidating things become.
And action also brings clarity. You don't need to have everything figured out before you begin. In fact, most of the learning happens during the process, not before it.
That's such an important point. Waiting for complete clarity is another form of delaying life. You figure things out by doing, by experimenting, and sometimes even by making mistakes.
So in a way, mistakes are not a waste of time. They're part of the journey. What truly wastes time is inaction, because it leaves you in the same place without any growth.
Exactly. And when you start seeing time as something valuable and limited, your decisions naturally change. You become more intentional about how you spend your days, who you spend them with, and what you choose to focus on.
And that's where real transformation begins, not with big, dramatic changes, but with small, consistent choices that align with the life you want to create.
Yes, and ultimately, it comes down to a simple but powerful question. If not now, then when? Because waiting for the perfect moment often means waiting forever.
And maybe the perfect moment isn't something you find, it's something you create by deciding to act despite the uncertainty.
Ethan, now that we've talked about how people get stuck in the illusion of later, I think the next important step is understanding how to break that cycle. Because awareness alone is not enough. You can realize that you've been wasting time, but without action, nothing really changes.
That's true, Mia. Awareness is just the starting point. Real transformation begins when you decide to take responsibility for your time and your choices. And honestly, that's where most people struggle because change requires effort and consistency.
Yes, and one of the biggest obstacles to that change is distraction. In today's world, distractions are everywhere. From endless scrolling to constant notifications, it has become incredibly easy to lose hours without even noticing where they went.
And the tricky part is that these distractions don't feel harmful in the moment. They feel relaxing, entertaining, or even necessary. But over time, they quietly consume your most valuable resource, your time.
Exactly. And it's not that taking breaks or relaxing is wrong. The problem arises when temporary distractions turn into daily habits that take priority over your goals and personal growth.
So the real question is, how do you take control of your time in a world full of distractions?
I think it starts with clarity. When you are clear about what truly matters to you, it becomes easier to recognize what is worth your time and what is not. Without that clarity, everything feels equally important, and you end up giving your attention to things that don't add value.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like having a direction. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up wandering aimlessly, and that's when time slips away without purpose.
Exactly. And once you have clarity, the next step is setting priorities. Not everything deserves your time and energy. You have to make conscious decisions about what comes first.
And I think that's where people often struggle, saying no, because saying no can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like you're missing out or disappointing others.
That's true. But in reality, every time you say yes to something unimportant, you are indirectly saying no to something meaningful. Your time is limited, so protecting it is not selfish, it's necessary.
That's a powerful perspective. It shifts the idea of saying no from being negative to being intentional. You're not rejecting things, you're choosing what truly matters.
Exactly. And another important factor in breaking the cycle of wasted time is discipline. Motivation can help you start something, but it doesn't last forever. Discipline is what keeps you going, especially on days when you don't feel like doing anything productive.
And discipline is often misunderstood. People think it means being strict or rigid, but in reality, it's about building consistent habits that support your goals.
Yes, and consistency is more important than intensity. You don't have to make huge changes overnight. Small, consistent actions over time create significant results.
That reminds me of how people often wait for the perfect mood to work on something. They say, I'll do it when I feel motivated, but that feeling doesn't always come.
Exactly. And that's why relying on motivation is unreliable. If you only act when you feel like it, you'll spend more time waiting than doing. Discipline means showing up even when you don't feel ready.
And I think another key element here is accountability. When you take ownership of your time, you stop blaming external factors and start focusing on what you can control.
That's very important. It's easy to say, I didn't have time, but in most cases, it's about how you chose to use your time. When you accept that responsibility, you gain the power to change things.
And with that power comes the ability to make better decisions. You start asking yourself questions like, is this the best use of my time? Or does this align with my goals?
Yes, and those small moments of awareness can make a big difference because life is not shaped by one big decision, it's shaped by countless small choices made every day.
And those choices add up. 10 minutes wasted here, an hour lost there, it may not seem like much in the moment, but over time it becomes a significant portion of your life.
Exactly, and that's why breaking the cycle of wasted time requires mindfulness. Being present and aware of how you spend your time allows you to make intentional decisions instead of acting on impulse.
And mindfulness also helps you appreciate the time you do have. Instead of constantly rushing or multitasking, you start focusing on one thing at a time and doing it well.
Yes, and that improves not just productivity, but also satisfaction. When you are fully engaged in what you're doing, even simple tasks can feel meaningful.
So, in a way, breaking the cycle of wasted time is not just about doing more, it's about doing better. It's about using your time in a way that aligns with your values and goals.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this is a process. You won't become perfectly disciplined overnight. There will be days when you slip back into old habits, and that's okay.
What matters is that you don't give up. You recognize those moments, learn from them, and continue moving forward.
Yes, because every day is a new opportunity to make better choices. You don't have to wait for a new year or a perfect moment. You can start right now with the next decision you make.
And those decisions, no matter how small, have the power to change the direction of your life over time.
Exactly, because life is not about how much time you have, it's about how you choose to use it.
Mia, after understanding how to break the cycle of wasted time, I think the next natural step is learning how to live with intention. Because it's not just about avoiding distractions, it's about consciously deciding how you want to live your life.
That's absolutely right, Ethan. Living with intention means moving from autopilot to awareness. Most people go through life reacting to situations instead of actively shaping their path. They follow routines, meet expectations, and respond to circumstances without asking themselves if those actions truly align with who they are.
And when you live like that, it's easy to lose a sense of direction. You may be doing everything that looks right on the outside, but internally, something feels missing.
Exactly. That missing feeling often comes from a lack of alignment. When your actions don't match your values, you feel disconnected. Living with intention helps bridge that gap. It allows you to make choices that reflect what truly matters to you.
So, how does someone begin that process? Because for many people, especially those who've been on autopilot for a long time, it can feel overwhelming to suddenly take control.
I think it starts with self-awareness. You need to understand your values, your priorities, and what genuinely brings you fulfillment. Without that understanding, it's difficult to make intentional choices.
That makes sense, because if you don't know what matters to you, you'll end up following what matters to others.
Exactly. And while there's nothing wrong with being influenced by others, your life shouldn't be entirely defined by external expectations. Intentional living means taking ownership of your decisions.
And that ownership brings clarity. When you're clear about your direction, you stop feeling lost. Even if things don't go perfectly, you still feel grounded because you know why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, and another important aspect of intentional living is being present. Many people are physically present, but mentally somewhere else, thinking about the past or worrying about the future. When you're not present, you miss out on the richness of your current experience.
That's so true. Being present allows you to fully engage with life. Whether it's a conversation, a task, or even a quiet moment, you start to experience things more deeply.
And that depth adds meaning to your life. It transforms ordinary moments into something valuable, because life is not just made of big achievements, it's made of everyday experiences.
I think another important part of living intentionally is setting boundaries. Without boundaries, your time and energy can easily be consumed by things that don't align with your priorities.
Absolutely. Boundaries are essential. They protect your focus and ensure that you are investing your time in the right areas. And again, it comes back to saying no, not out of negativity, but out of clarity.
And I guess intentional living also requires courage, because sometimes making intentional choices means going against the norm or stepping away from what feels comfortable.
Yes, it definitely requires courage. Choosing your own path is not always easy, but it's necessary if you want to live a life that feels authentic. Comfort can be tempting, but growth happens when you challenge yourself.
And when you start living intentionally, even your challenges feel different. They don't feel like obstacles, they feel like part of your journey.
Exactly. Your perspective shifts. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me, you start asking, what can I learn from this? And that mindset makes a huge difference.
So, in a way, living with intention is not about controlling everything. It's about responding consciously to whatever life brings.
Yes, and that's what creates a sense of purpose. You stop drifting through life and start creating it, one decision at a time.
Ethan, as we come to the final part of this conversation, I think it's important to reflect on one of the biggest fears people have when it comes to time, the fear of regret.
That's a powerful point, Mia. Regret often comes from looking back and realizing that you didn't live the way you truly wanted to. It's not just about mistakes, it's about missed opportunities and unfulfilled potential.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that most people don't regret the things they tried and failed at. They regret the things they never tried at all. The chances they didn't take, the words they didn't say, and the dreams they kept postponing.
And that connects perfectly with everything we've discussed so far. When you keep waiting for the right moment, you increase the chances of regret later in life.
Yes, and that's why it's so important to shift your mindset. Instead of fearing failure, you should fear inaction, because failure teaches you something, but inaction leaves you wondering, what if?
And those what if questions can stay with you for a long time. They create a sense of unfinished business that's hard to ignore.
Exactly. But the good news is that regret is not something you have to accept. You can reduce it by making conscious choices today, by taking action, even if it's imperfect.
And I think it's also important to understand that life is not about perfection. You don't have to get everything right. What matters is that you show up, you try, and you learn along the way.
Yes, because every experience, whether it's success or failure, adds value to your life. It shapes your perspective and helps you grow.
And when you look at life that way, mistakes stop being something to fear. They become part of the journey.
Exactly. And that's why the goal should not be to live a life without mistakes, but to live a life without regrets. A life where you know you gave your best and didn't hold yourself back unnecessarily.
And that kind of life comes from being present, intentional, and courageous. It comes from making choices that align with who you are rather than who others expect you to be.
Yes, and it also comes from appreciating the time you have, because time is the one thing you can never get back. Once it's gone, it's gone.
So instead of focusing on how much time you have, maybe we should focus on how we use the time we have.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Ethan, because life is not measured in years, it's measured in moments, experiences, and the impact you create.
And every moment is an opportunity to grow, to connect, to learn, and to live more fully.
Exactly. And it's never too late to start. No matter where you are in life, you can always choose to make better use of your time.
And that choice can change everything. It can shift your mindset, your habits, and ultimately your entire life.
So, if there's one thing we want our listeners to take away from today's conversation, it's this. Life is short, so don't waste it waiting. Start living, start acting, and start making the most of every moment you have.
Because in the end, it's not about how long you lived, but how well you lived.
Thank you so much for being with us today and listening to this conversation.
If you found this discussion meaningful, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more conversations like this and explore all the podcasts available on Speak and Feel English.
We'll see you in the next episode.